The small town in Maine was quiet at night, with its snow-covered streets illuminated by flickering lampposts. Inside her cozy but cluttered home, Maggie, a widowed teacher in her 50s, graded papers by the dim light of a lamp. An old rotary phone, dusty and disconnected, sat on a side table. At exactly 12:03 a.m., the phone rang. Maggie jumped, staring at it in disbelief. The phone rang again. "That's not possible," she muttered to herself. Hesitantly, she picked up the receiver. "Hello," she said, her voice trembling. There was a long pause before a familiar voice spoke softly. "Mags." Maggie's hand shook. It was her late husband, Tom. "Tom? How are you?" she began, her voice barely audible. "Listen to me, Mags. It's not safe. He's coming for you," Tom's voice warned. "Who? What are you talking about?" Maggie asked, panic rising. The line crackled, distorting Tom's voice. "The eyes." "Don't look at the eyes," he said, before the line went dead. Maggie stared at the phone, her heart racing. Later, in her bedroom, Maggie lay awake, unable to shake the fear. A shadow moved outside her window. Her breath quickened as she got up and peered out. Standing in the snow was a figure, its eyes glowing red like embers. Maggie gasped, stumbling back. Downstairs, the phone rang again. The sound echoed through the house, relentless and chilling. The Carter family moved into their new home in the quiet neighborhood of Elms Wood, a place with tree-lined streets and a serene atmosphere. The house, though modest and worn with peeling white paint, had a peculiar presence. As they unpacked, Emily, their 10-year-old daughter, paused and whispered, "Did you hear that?" Her father, David, holding a lamp, glanced at her and asked, "Hear what, kiddo?" Emily hesitated, her gaze fixed on the staircase. Whispering, "Like someone talking," she replied. Her mother, Lucy, smiled and said, "Maybe the house is just saying hello." But Emily whispered back to herself, "It doesn't sound friendly." Later that night, Emily lay awake in her room. Shadows from a swaying tree branch danced across her walls. Then the murmur returned, clearer now, as if a voice was calling her. "Emily, come downstairs," the voice whispered. Emily's breath quickened as she turned to the slightly ajar door. "Mom?" "Dad," she called out, but there was no answer. Standing at the foot of the staircase in the living room, she stared into the dark hallway leading to the basement. The whispers grew louder, layered with what sounded like her parents' voices. "Come here, Emily," the voice urged. She stepped forward cautiously, the creak of the wood deafening in the silence. Suddenly, Lucy's voice broke through the tension. "Emily!" Startled, Emily turned to see her mother at the top of the stairs, her face pale and panicked. "What are you doing?" Lucy demanded. "The voices. It's you and Dad," Emily stammered. Lucy grabbed her, pulling her away from the staircase as David appeared behind them, looking groggy. "We need to call someone," Lucy whispered, her voice trembling. As the family huddled together, the camera lingered on the staircase, where a faint murmur resumed, almost mocking them. The house at 814. Wickham Lane had stood empty for over a decade, its windows dark, its doors forever locked, but someone inside kept turning on the lights. When Owen's family pulled up to their new home, his heart sank. The Victorian behemoth loomed over the street like a sentinel, its peeling paint and broken shutters a silent warning. But to Owen's parents it was a fixer-upper, a steal, they said. To Owen it felt like stepping into a trap. "It's just an old house," his father said, brushing aside Owen's hesitation as they unpacked. "Old houses have quirks." But from the moment they moved in, Owen knew the house wasn't quirky. It was alive. At first it was small things, a draft that seemed to whisper his name, the faint sound of scratching behind the walls. His parents wrote it off as imagination. "You'll get used to it," his mother promised. One night, Owen woke to the flicker of his bedroom light. It strobed softly, then settled into a dim glow. "Bad wiring," his father said the next morning. But Owen had seen something in that brief, flashing light. A shadow, tall and spindly, standing in the corner of his room. The scratching behind the walls grew louder, more frantic. One evening, as he sat alone at the kitchen table, Owen heard it clearly. A voice. "Let me out," it hissed. Owen froze. The sound wasn't muffled as if it came through the walls. It was right behind him. Slowly, he turned, but there was nothing there. Just the house, quiet and still. Determined to uncover the truth, Owen started exploring. He found old photographs and brittle letters hidden in the attic, pieces of a story the house had tried to bury. The house wasn't just old, it was cursed. A man named Victor Langley had built it for his family in 1892. But one by one, his children disappeared. His wife vanished last, and Victor himself was never seen again. They say he bricked himself into the walls, or perhaps the house did it for him. By the time Owen uncovered the final piece of the puzzle, a journal detailing Victor's descent into madness, it was too late. The walls began to tremble, groaning as cracks spread across the plaster. A pair of skeletal hands emerged, clawing through the wallpaper. A face followed, gaunt, hollow-eyed, and grinning with too many teeth. "I'm free," the watcher whispered, stepping into the room. Owen tried to scream, but the sound was swallowed by the house, which had been waiting for its next victim. If you board the midnight train, you'd better know where you're going, because once the doors close, they don't open again. Elaine hadn't meant to catch the midnight train. She hadn't even known it existed. But as the rain poured in icy sheets, soaking her to the bone, she saw its lights glimmering through the mist. The station had been empty moments before, but now the sleek black train sat waiting, its doors yawning open. Her instinct screamed to turn back, but the cold and exhaustion pushed her forward. Inside, the air was thick and warm, almost stifling. The conductor stood at the end of the car, his face shadowed by the brim of his hat. He didn't speak, just nodded as she handed over her ticket. She didn't remember buying it. Elaine sank into a seat, the leather creaking beneath her. She glanced around. The other passengers sat perfectly still, their faces pale and emotionless. One woman's head lolled to the side, her eyes staring blankly out the window. Unease prickled up Elaine's spine. As the train pulled away from the station, the world outside transformed. They passed through dense forests where twisted trees dripped black sap, fields where shadowy figures moved without faces, and towns where the streets were filled with mannequins frozen mid-stride. Elaine's stomach churned as she realized none of this was real. It was worse than real. It was familiar. The train wasn't taking her home. It was taking her back, to moments she'd buried, places she'd tried to forget. At each stop, the doors opened to reveal a scene from her past. Her childhood home, where her sister disappeared one stormy night. The hospital room where she'd left her dying father alone because she couldn't bear to say goodbye. The lake where she'd made a choice that still haunted her dreams. "I don't want this," Elaine whispered, but the train pressed on. The passengers around her began to move, turning their heads slowly to look at her. Their eyes were hollow, their mouths stretched into unnatural smiles. The conductor approached, his shadow stretching long and thin down the aisle. "Your stop is next," he said in a voice like grinding metal. When the train screeched to a halt, Elaine saw the station. It was old, crumbling, overgrown with weeds. Her name was etched into a gravestone just beyond the platform. "This is the end of the line," the conductor said, extending a hand. "Unless you'd like to ride again." Elaine stepped off the train, the whispers of the passengers following her. As the train disappeared into the mist, she realized the choice she'd been given: to face what waited for her at the station, or to board the midnight train again, doomed to relive her nightmares forever. In the end, the midnight train never really leaves. It's always waiting for the next lost soul to climb aboard.